Hey everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a show dedicated to the adult survivors of child sexual abuse across the world. We know there are many of us. We know this is not a number that is decreasing, and so it's highly important that you have somewhere to go and a safe place to land. As with all shows, there's always a trigger warning. Something that may be said or a topic that may be raised may be triggering. In that case, please do stop watching, go to the show notes below, and you'll be guided to some resource and help. I'm very honoured today to bring a special guest all the way from the UK. No, she's not sitting with me. She is actually in the UK. And it's Wednesday night there, so please join me in welcoming Emma Jane Taylor, EJ, to the show. Now, EJ is a campaigner and founder of Project 9010. She does incredible work out there for survivors, and I'm dying to hear all about the initiative she's running, the radio show she talks on. There's lots of goodies in here, so I think we're going to be thrilled. EJ, hey, welcome.
Hi, Gloria. Thank you so much for having me on your show today, and hello to everybody who's watching.
Thank you. Hey, look, it's we don't know where this will go. Nothing is scripted. We just go where we are led. And you will be safe, and our survivors will gain some really useful benefit. I can already see that. So thank you. Just as we're beginning, what's useful for us is to understand your story, simply so that others watching may feel, that was me as well, or I understand that, or oh, I felt that too. And thereby we're becoming unified and perhaps feeling less alone. So I guess wherever you're comfortable to maybe start sharing your experience of child sexual abuse, we would love to hear that.
Thank you, Gloria. Well, for me, my story started when I was 9 years old, and it was someone known to the family, and it was an isolated incident. I often think, if it had remained an isolated incident, would I have ever spoken out? Would I ever have campaigned? And I say that because I come across a lot of people who have had isolated incidences and they don't feel like it's serious enough. Well, before I go on, let me tell you, once is too many times. It doesn't matter if it's once, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years. Any form of sexual abuse to a child is wrong. It shouldn't have happened. And you are absolutely, there's no competitions, right? It doesn't matter how often it happened. It's wrong, and there are people who can support you, but don't think that someone's got a worse case or not, because every case of child sexual abuse is horrendous. So my experience of child sexual abuse started around 9 years old, and it, like I say, it was an isolated incident. Nothing happened again. I was confused at 9, but didn't really, if I look back, I kind of think I didn't really acknowledge it. And then when I was around 11 years old, I used to live with my mother and stepfather, and I used to go and see my father every other weekend. And I was a happy child, actually. I was a happy child. I had a happy life. I had a cat called Honey. I had brothers. I had step siblings who would visit from time to time. And actually, life was pretty good. Every other weekend I used to go and see my biological father, until one weekend when he said to me there was a kind of a problem in our relationship, and he might not be able to see me again. Without going into all the details, that was the end of my relationship with my father, and I was 11 years old, and And it was really sad because I loved this man. He was a really, up until this point, he had been a really nice daddy, and he was handsome and funny and loving, and yeah, I mean, just every girl's dream. So when that got taken from me, I fell apart, actually. I was distraught. And I had just started senior school. I started to feel dirty, actually, and I think the incident at 9 sort of caught up with me suddenly. It's so funny, isn't it, how trauma suddenly catches up with trauma. And it's sort of like I was just feeling dirty about what had happened. I was 11, 12. I was a little bit older. I still wasn't aware, actually, what had happened, because I think, I was still underdeveloped. And then when that happened with my father, I think that sort of pulled me back again and delayed my onset of maturity. And I think there was just a lot of confusion around the families, because obviously, there was a lot of stuff going on in the families when this had happened to me. And, and like I say, I had brothers, and everyone had sort of different stories around what had happened. And I felt really lost. I felt really lonely. I'd lost my dad, my prince, my hero. He'd gone. And then out of nowhere, a family friend rocked up, an older man who was really kind to me, and he was really generous and listened, and cared. And when I didn't feel great, he'd give me some drugs, and if I didn't feel great, he might give me some drink. He would buy me nice clothes. He'd give me some nice jewelry. And I was like, wow, this new friend is really nice. And he softened the blow, really. He softened that blow of what had happened to me with, obviously, the loss of my father. And so, I was around 11, 12 years old, I think, around that time when that all started. I was 11 when my father left. I was around 12 and this new friend turned up. And then I was just short of my 13th birthday, I think, when he raped me. And I was hook, line and sinker by that point, right? So, he'd built up this bond, he'd built up this friendship, and there was a battle there for the next few years while he continued grooming and sexually abusing me, and literally he could do whatever he wanted, right? I mean, I was a sitting duck in many ways, vulnerable child. So that went on till I was about 16. And then around sort of 16, 17, that was when, I started to realize that there was something not right about this picture, and tried to sort of step away, really, and move away from it. He was everywhere I went. He was either at my school, he was waiting at bus stops, he was literally everywhere. Would make me sneak out at night times. But I did, he had that power, he had that control. And he literally, I was like puppet on a string, like most victims would relate to, and he could do what he wanted. So during those years, I pretty much fell apart, I would say. I was very confused. I really missed my dad, and my schooling suffered. I think most people thought I'd be dead or in prison by the time I was 20. I really sort of fell apart. I was told I was the girl going nowhere, the failure. And, the abuse, the abandonment, the rejection really did take its toll. The teenage years, I was drinking excessively, taking drugs. I had become bulimic. I had various disorders, and addictions. And by 15, I think it was probably safe to say I was fairly exhausted by life, very addicted. I was struggling. My school was really suffering. I was put into isolation. I was excluded, given reports, put in detention, suspended, literally written off, labelled the juvenile delinquent, put into child psychiatry. and told I was a failure. And I think what happened was, obviously, the confusion around what happened in the family led to most people at that point believing that what had happened with my father had led me to behave in this way, which, you know, I'm sure there was an element of that, of course, because he'd ripped me apart. But it was more than that. You know, I was nervous. I had night terrors. I had constant nausea. I was a late developer with everything. I had a bit of OCD, PTSD, eating disorders, paranoia, anxiety, everything. I mean, classic red flag right there. In that, you know, 1980s child. Yeah, so, you know, that was sort of when my story, well, I'd say I stepped away from the abuse around 16, and then the story does start after that, doesn't it? Because there's a trauma.
Yeah.
The trauma fallout is huge, as we know.
Well, and look, wow, and incredible, and you know, such love and empathy coming your way, EJ. Just, you know, trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. That trauma then went on for several years. And, you know, when you think about it, as you tried to step away as a teenager, he just wasn't having it. But sometimes, and for our survivors watching, what we don't realize is that even though we may be in our bodies at 15 or 16, we actually are the age the trauma began. So we don't actually have that ability or resource to be able to say no and mean it, because alongside that, there's also the manipulation, the very clever grooming, EJ. He would have to get a gold medal for that, wouldn't he?
Yes.
Oh,
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, and actually, just thinking back, I mean, it's incredible to think that it happened, but it's not incredible to think that when you think the child is vulnerable and underdeveloped, and anyone showing any kind of emotional interest to a broken child it's an easy
easy
target.
target. And the other thing you raise, and you raise some amazing things actually, so thank you. That one of the other things you kind of alluded to without saying was a bit of stalking appears to have happened, which meant you weren't actually safe whether you were with him or whether you weren't, because I can imagine the anxiety that would have built up in you, not knowing if when you turn that next corner to get on the bus, he was actually going to be there. So can you tell us a
100%.
bit about that? Yeah. Yeah.
It was 100%. And actually, it was an anxiety. It was a fear, because you're looking over your shoulder the whole time. And have I done something right? Have I done something wrong? Especially as I got a bit older, when I realized that it felt inappropriate. You know, here I am, a young teenage, 14, 15-year-old, all my mates are going out, you know, meeting boyfriends of their age. And he's a dirty old man, essentially, waiting on the corner of the bus stop, or you know, at the school, hiding in the distance, you know,
Yeah.
always somewhere I was. And yeah, there was a level of anxiety there, and a level of fear of, you know, you couldn't move, actually. But I think there was also this feeling of someone was taking not care, they were putting me in a place of importance to their life. And obviously it wasn't important, we know that now, but when you are a child, absolutely devastated to have lost my father, confused, lots of confusion around the family, with lots of other upsets going on because of that story, and other stories that went on because of it. And then someone's there for you. It's it's almost that anyone who's been groomed will understand at that moment it's quite important, because you feel important to someone. You feel like you're special,
Yeah.
and you feel they make you feel so special. And of course, this isn't true at all. and they're just selfish, vile monsters, really,
Yeah.
and you're not special at all.
But
Of course, you've had to find your special.
yes, and that's such a huge obstacle, and I want to come back to that because, you know, as you're talking, the reality is it's that word confusion again, you know, EJ, and it pops up for us as survivors when we listen to these incredible stories and life journeys. But it's so confusing for a child. We didn't have the cognition back then to make sense of it. Now, as you pan back and you see actually vile monsters are what they were, he knew exactly what he was doing. And of course, you were made to feel special. And of course, you were needing to feel that because you'd had a significant loss. So
Yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
surprised. I'm not surprised. The other thing, just to briefly touch on, you alluded to earlier comparative suffering, and such a wonderful point you raise. Whether this happened a one-time thing or many, the point is this: what emerges in us is PTSD responses. Yeah. One time or 100 times, it doesn't matter. The point is they arose, and that is what we have to deal with as adults trying to overcome the trauma. So I think that was a really valid point as well.
Thank you. Yeah, really
Yeah.
important. And I hear it all the time. I'm sorry, I'm having to sort of keep jogging
Oh,
water here. I've got a bit of a cough at the moment.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I hear it all the time. I hear people say, so and so story is far worse than mine. I'm like, but that doesn't make sense. Every story is important, and every
Yes.
story needs to be heard. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter whether it happened one day or 1 year or 10 years. You know, it just so happened that for for the biggest sort of influential years of my life, like many, that was what happened in the confusion. It's interesting, actually. Someone said, you know, do I blame anyone? I don't blame anyone, actually, for what happened to me, because well, when I talk about my mother and my stepfather, they weren't educated enough to not understand that you can't trust your friends, right? Had my father not left, maybe that may never have happened.
Yeah.
But I cannot be thinking that way and having regrets and what ifs, muts and maybes. It happened.
Yeah.
What I have to do now is say I've learned from it, and through my experiences, I've been able to find a way to be the woman I am today because of it, doing the work that I'm doing, and I'm proud of that, right? I want to make sure that children don't. I want children to have a childhood, and I don't feel like I've missed mine, because there have been happy times throughout those years,
Yeah.
but I don't have a great memory for much of it, and that's the trauma of obviously the child sexual abuse, but also the trauma of what happened when my father left.
100%. And it's that loss on top of loss, really, which can underline trauma as well. And I'm thinking, EJ, and apologies if you can hear a noise out there. We've got some workmen down the road doing things. You know, I think as you're talking to it makes me think, although mum and stepdad didn't know or kind of suspect the family friend, I wonder if they noticed behavior in you that would have changed, and whether or not, as a child, being so heavily groomed and successfully groomed, he was a master at it, whether in fact you were trying to show them in your behavior. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
you have no words to be able to communicate as a child. Well, certainly when I kind of look back to, I was born in 1972. I was 1981 when the first isolated incident happened, and then I was 16. So in 1980, however many years, 1986. when that no, actually older than that, I can't work it out anyway. Yeah, so I was I had no vocabulary, I had no understanding. I had to sit and go into psychiatric, like I say, into psychiatric help. But they were putting that because they written me off at school, that I was, you know, this girl going nowhere and, you know, failure. And I think just because my mum kept begging them to keep me in school and help me through, because they had the fallout of my father to lean on. That was the convenient story, I guess, for the guy who had groomed and sexually abused me. He, you know, I guess, well, I don't even know, but I suspect I must have talked to him about stuff because he was my friend. And I didn't talk to anyone else. So yeah, the behavior was at home. I was the horror. And I had been drinking. I was quite often drinking. I didn't go to school most days. I'd go and drink with friends and smoke drugs or take drugs with my abuser, and just completely fell out. So when I was around my family, my behavior was appalling, in every sense. Sometimes I can't even relate myself to that person, because it wasn't, I never wanted to be that child, right? I mean, I was a nice child up until that first abuse happened. So yeah, I mean, I definitely, my behavior was speaking volumes, but because of what they knew, which was the fallout of what had happened with my father, there was, I guess, some sympathy around that, and without actually looking any further. But actually, of course, it was much deeper and much more complex, because it was multifaceted with everything else that was going on in my life. So yeah, it was, I guess, you know, when I look back, I guess it was a really hard to detect, right? Because of what had happened. Like I said, the isolated incident, maybe I might not have be here today as the campaigner as I am if it had just been that. But because of what happened with my father, and then what happened after that, and everything sort of came together, you know, I this just everything, you know, even just sort of having, I had to have a bath every night. Now, as well, knowing what I know now, if a child was bathing every night, I'd be like, we might want to have a conversation. It might not be just her father leaving that's making her feel that she needs to clean herself every night. But they didn't have that education back then, right?
No.
And they, you know, the education we have today would really recognize it. I'm 51 this year. I still have a bath before I go to bed. It doesn't matter what time of the day it is, I still have a bath. And I don't do it because I want to be clean. I turned it into my relaxation, my moment to have some peace at the end of the day. It can be 3 o'clock in the morning and I would still have a nice, soothing bath.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love the fact that you've turned it into that, because that's just beautiful and so self-nurturing and soothing, actually. And you know, it's interesting, you kind of discuss what type of child you turned into. You know, I just want to give you this, and the beautiful survivors watching us as well. The thing is, you were always a beautiful child. You adapted to survive. That's all you were doing. You were just trying to survive, and you did the best you could with what you knew. And so, you know, full credit to the beautiful young EJ, because what you had to do doesn't diminish who you were and what you were trying to overcome. So I just want to give you that, EJ, because sometimes I think we feel that because of how we behaved as children, we may have caused parents or others, you know, damage or harm or injury or concern. But actually, as we look at it, we see it was just a desperate child trying to say, help.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a hard one, isn't it? It can carry through. I'm interested, as you're describing as well, the coping mechanisms in terms of the impact during and post all of this horror, what, you know, the eating disorders, the drugs, the alcohol, I guess deliberately hanging out with people who would enable all or some of that. And it brings me to that self-worth. And as we know, for survivors, sometimes self-worth is fairly low. So
Mm.
would you like to share with us how you kind of managed to move from no self-worth to some? Was there a particular point?
Yes, there was. I was so I was around 19, I think, when I decided to leave the UK, and I hated everyone. I
Ah!
mean, when I say I hated everyone, I had a hate, and I guess it wasn't hate; it was a hate for myself, and I was interpreting that as hate for other people. I didn't like my mum. I didn't like my stepfather. I didn't like my family. I liked my friends because we would go out and drink and take drugs and party. I was kind of known around, you know, as the party girl. If there was a party, I was there. I'd be on top of the tables and having a great time. But actually, the reality was I'd be going home crying into my pillow. And I did that for years and years and years and years and years. Um, and yeah, anyone who tried to control me or put any sort of stipulations around what I was doing, I just didn't, nothing mattered. And so when I was 19, I decided it was probably time. I had an opportunity to go to Spain to nanny. So I went out to Spain and I stayed on a bit longer and I made some friends and came back here. And then I went back again the following year and then did the same for like 3 years, sort of extended summers, came back, extended summer. So I made lots of new friends. I drank my way around Spain. I still wasn't talking about anything about my personal story. And I think it was all starting to land a little bit more. Obviously, my brain was starting to develop and my thoughts were sort of getting deeper and darker and more confused. And it did lead to most people thinking, you know, someone said to me she'll be dead or in prison by the time she was 20. I remember, in fact, I'll tell you a story. There was some trouble in a local town, and I'd gone down there, and I was in the thick of it. And I was never horrible or hurt. I didn't hurt anybody. I was just hurting myself, and I'd lash out. And but I was a troublemaker. And there was a policeman putting all my mates in the riot van, and I was kicking off, and he said, "Emma Jane, you need to go home now. Otherwise, I have to put you in this riot van." And I was like, "Oh, I don't care, you know, put me in the riot van." And he said, "No, I'm telling you, go home now." Anyway, long story short, that was when I was, I don't know, 17, and maybe 6 years ago, when I just started speaking out, I bumped into this guy at a party. It was in a band thing, and I recognized him straight away. And of course, you know, I'm now, you know, 30 odd years further forward. And I said, "Oh,
Hey.
I said, you're Trevor, aren't you?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, you won't remember me." He went, "I will never forget you."
Oh,
I said, "Oh." And he said, "I knew you'd be okay, and I was glad I sent you home that night."
oh, oh,
And I'm like, wow, I mean, no one else saw this in me. Yeah, here he is, a guy I didn't even know, a policeman who I'd had lots of, you know, rumblings with over the year. And I thought, he said, "No, you had something in you that made me always think you'd be all right." And I was like, wow, okay, well, that's kind of something. But anyway, so anyway, I digress. But when I was 21,
mm,
my stepfather, who I, at that point in my life, I didn't like anybody. But, you know, when I look back, I think actually he'd done everything for me. You know, he'd brought me up, he'd been there, he'd had me um, uh, verbally abusing him and being horrible to him and everything. And he just took it. He gave us nice holidays, he gave us a nice house, he gave us a nice home, he gave us everything. I mean, I was a very lucky girl in many ways. but he wasn't my dad, and so I could never be felt like I never felt like I could be close to him because of, I still blamed everybody for what my dad had done, actually, but the reality is obviously that was his decision. I know that now as a nearly 51-year-old woman. And then when I was 21, I got a call to say he'd been taken into hospital, and he'd had his heart problems, and you know, really serious, very serious. Had to go into emergency bypass, have new valves put in, and I went rushing to the hospital. And when I got there, he was just gone, like wide up. And I sat on his bed and I burst out into tears. I said, and it was like this like weight. It was like, felt like I'd been hit round the face with a wet fish. And here was a man about to die who hadn't done nothing but love me for all those years. Actually, I do think I was a bit younger. I was probably about 19. And here he was, like lying there about to die. And I was like, suddenly it hit me. I'm like, what am I doing? And so I sat on his bed, and he came out of intensive care, and I sat there and I sat there and I never left his bed. And then that's when I went off to Spain. And then I decided to, when I came back, to start sort of considering, when I came back at 21, 22, I was like trying to get jobs, and I was like, I can't do this, I can't do that. And then at 23, I set up my own business. But it was that moment, it was a real moment in my world where I was like, those next sort of 4 or 5 years started to sort of change when I realized I still had a lot of work to do, because, you know, I still really did miss my dad, and I still had this great love for him, and I still wished that he would come back, and I would watch a program here in the UK where they would reconnect families, long lost families, and I'd still wish that someone would call me from the program and it would be me. But it never was, and I never got another birthday card. I never got another Christmas card. So yeah, but you know what I did get was the most beautiful stepfather I could ever have wanted. He's 87 this year. He's my best friend. And he has been he's been the man that's loved me and cared and looked after me, and he's the one that's restored my faith back in people and men, you know, and helped me understand that, you know, not every man is going to treat you badly.
Isn't, you know, well, it's just the, you know, the synergy of it all, and the fact that here he was throughout your whole, you know, life, in terms of once he became your stepdad, and he was always present, and he was always available, and he was always loving. And yet the yearning for dad could never leave, to the point where it maybe occluded the beauty he was, the beauty that your stepdad was. And isn't it powerful, EJ? And what a beautiful moment for you to have seen that and recognized all of that. And it's not at all comparing. No one can replace the wonderful dad you had ever. But isn't it not ironic, it's the wrong word, but the fact that this man was a good man and he was always there, unconditionally.
Yeah, and I didn't see him. Yeah, and I didn't see, and it was in the unconditional love, and I didn't actually recognize him till I was in my 20s.
Yes.
Yet he'd been there since I was sort of like, I don't know, actually 4 or 5 years old. My parents separated when I was 2.
Wow.
So yeah, so he was there. And you know, whilst it's interesting sort of hearing you say about my dad, if I think I've had a better option in the person who brought me up, because he clearly was strong enough to stay with me through whatever was going on between the families when we were children. You just don't give up on your kids like that, right? You just cannot give up on your kids. Kids need you. And if you are going to, you know, take them out of your life, think of the consequences. Don't think about yourself. Think of the consequences to that child and the impact that could potentially have to that child, and leaving them vulnerable at a vulnerable stage in their own young life is really not a cool thing to do. So I don't advise anyone to do that. If you've had kids, you stay with those kids, you look after those kids.
Well,
And of course,
yeah. A daughter's self-esteem is a little known fact, but is decided by how her father views her. So I don't know if you knew that, but a girl's self-esteem. And the other thing too, I don't know if you'd heard of this before, but these two stages in children's lives when they separate, individuate, and the second time is at the age of 11 to 12. So I think that's quite powerful, and we know with that stage we're coming into puberty, all of that, but we're also becoming our own person, and we can only become who we are by being able to reject aspects of both mum and dad. With you and your experience, you never got to do any of that. So of course there was going to be a massive gap and a big hole that couldn't be filled, and then along came creep.
Yes, and then there was one other moment actually, when I was working in a pub, probably sort of like early 20s, so late teens, early 20s.
So back in the
One of
UK or over in
I was
Spain?
back in the UK. I came back when I was about 21, and then when I was around 22, I was working in a bar, and one of the regulars came in and he said, "EJ, what do you want to do with your life?" Now, I'm also a professional dancer. I was a professional dancer and a performer. And I said, "Oh, I want to be a dancer and I want to go into performing arts and do more of that." And he knew me as the party animal in town, right? And he was like, and he started laughing. And I said, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "Because you're never going to do that." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you're just always partying and drunk and on drugs." And he was so brutally honest. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, that's not who I want to be, right? That's not my legacy. That's not where I want to be. I was now sort of 20, 21, 22, and that was when I sort of started to sort of step away and go into therapy and start having more thought about who I was and my self-worth. And I think just it's a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but from the minute my stepfather went into hospital to the moment that this punter said that to me, they were the significant years that made me think, right, I've got to do something here. I've got to make a change. And that's when I guess that sort of like that table turned for me, and it made me think a lot differently about who I was and what I was doing and where I was going. And actually, this guy follows me on Facebook now, and I bumped into him, and I said, a bit like the policeman, I said, "That night when you came in the pub," I said, "that turned my life around." He said, "What did I do? What did I say?" He has got no recollection. And I reminded him, and he was like, "Oh," and he's very sweet actually. He likes like all my stuff now because he understands it a bit better. But yeah,
That's
those were my
amazing.
significant moments.
Isn't it interesting, EJ? As I'm listening to you, I'm connecting a few dots. Tell me if this speaks to you. But here you've had some significant men who have let you down so badly, kind of dropped you from a height, if you like. Equally, you've had some really significant, life-changing moments through good men. Isn't it interesting that both are true? I can't hear you. Can't hear.
Yes, and that's the great tapestry of life, isn't it? Good and bad. It rubs, but it also can explode into something very constructive and positive if you're in the right place to allow it
Yeah.
to. And I certainly wasn't as a young child, but as a young a young woman. My thoughts were moving more around those conversations, but it still took, a good 20 more years to get to that point.
Of course, and for our survivors watching, there is no time limit, there is no time frame, there is no pressure to, within X amount of years, become this or change that. How do you know when it's for you? Because it will appear in front of you. And as EJ has just said, there were just a few pivotal moments where even random strangers had made a comment, and it was just enough for her mind to be ready to absorb and then take action over the following few years. EJ, let's move on to the fabulous Project 9010. Would you like to share with us what that entails, how you set it up, what it all means, please?
Yeah, so Project 9010. So about 4 years ago, when COVID started, I started sort of moving around. I'd been speaking for a couple of years. My book had been published, and I was doing sort of a lot more work, sort of talking out about sort of my story. And then obviously the conversation kept coming up about, this 90-10 statistic. 90% of people who are sexually abused by someone they know, which we all know. Yet we are still educating on 10% stranger danger at school. So, it was really rubbing with me, this conversation. It wasn't sitting well that, this education was going on. And I was very lucky I had an opportunity to do a TED Talk on the 90, it was called "It's Not Just the Strangers We Should Be Careful Of." And that's where I started tiptoeing into this sort of conversation, this 90-10 statistic. I felt like I really wanted to pull together everything that I was doing. At that time, I was working all over the world with my professional job, as a mentor and a coach, and just sort of felt like I was being pulled in a million different places that they were great, but they weren't really where I wanted to be. Obviously, I have my own business, and I have been in business for 25 years, and that continues. But I knew I wanted to do more, and I felt like charity was the place to go, and it was my destination. And so through various conversations and working with various different people, we came up with Project 9010, which is obviously now a charity, which is a registered charity. And boy, that was a journey and a half to get that over the line.
Oh,
I don't know about you guys over in Australia, and I guess it has to be hard, right? Because otherwise everybody would go and set up a charity. But we are a full charity. We got registered in March this year. I'm an educated woman. I felt like I had to go back to school for a lot of the application and the process.
Yes.
And I've now got a strong board. I have an advisory committee, and I have a board who I respond to as well. And we're now in, I would say that's been sort of, so 4 years ago, I decided this would be what we needed to do. 2 years ago, I started really sort of pushing it on. Last year, we sort of formed the board, and then we got the applications through. But now the real work starts, because we've now got to fundraise. We've now got to find a way to make this charity a success here in the UK. And so what we're doing is we are going to be doing education. We're going to be doing so it's all about education, protection, and raising awareness of child sexual abuse. That's the focus. That's the end goal. The bit we're doing now is the set up, the foundations, the structure, putting everything in order. It's like a building block, isn't it? I feel like we're on the bottom layer of building a house. We're putting our foundations together, laying a few bricks, getting everything in order for the accounting, the admin, the procedures. Sometimes I go a bit cross-eyed in our meetings because I'm like, oh gosh, I've got so much to do. But we are getting it done, and yeah. So that sort of, the charity stuff is all out there, and I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing and where we're at and how we are moving forward. So our first anniversary ball is next year, and we will be doing a big celebration here in the UK on the launch day was the 1st of May. I obviously started my own campaign here in the UK called #NotMyShame, which is launched on the 1st of May. We're doing a big celebration of that as well. And then the party will be the anniversary party for Project 9010, which will be on the 4th of May next year. So there's a lot to do. And I'm very blessed with a huge, I mean, I'm so lucky. I have so many people around me here in the UK working with me to put this charity together, the event together, the you know, all the things that I'm learning all the time are helping with me. So yeah, that's where we're at with that.
Wow, your feet don't touch the ground. I can see the amount of work that goes on. And here in New Zealand, with the charity I've set up, 100%. It's the hoops you go through, EJ, and it's just so much work to even become accepted, let alone registered. So well done, and what a wonderful gift. Globally, not just within the UK. So appreciate that. Hey, as we're moving into close, I just wanted to check in with you. We've got amazing survivors watching, some of whom have been on their personal recovery road now for years, and some of whom are fairly new to this. What advice would you give to survivors watching? What would you recommend?
Well, so one of the things that I really did find was helpful in my recovery was when I turned the conversation around, and this is when the sort of the campaign really took hold for me, in that we go around in circles with survivors and conversations, and that's good. That's a really good thing. But I was thinking, we're going round and round and round and round and round. We need to break free. We need to step out. We need to find a way to engage other people, which is why I started the campaign, which is why I shared my slogan 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now. And then 2 years ago, I put it on Twitter. 1 year ago, I created an artwork piece for it. And then last year, I put it on a T-shirt. It was turning that conversation. So, and realizing that none of this was my fault. So my slogan was, which is on my T-shirt, so it says, I don't know if you can even see that, or
Not
whether
my
it's that
shame.
different. So it's called #NotMyShame. I'm not afraid to say I was sexually abused as a child. I was a child. It isn't my shame.
Perfect.
So I put it out on a T-shirt just for me, because I really sort of felt the impact of this helped me step forward. It helped me go, yeah, of course I had to go through all those years I went through. There's no way I could have gone from realizing to this without the bits in the middle. But it allowed me to sort of close that anyway. So that was one of the biggest things, and what's then happened now is that lots of survivors are like, oh yeah, I want to wear one, I want to wear one. So we started a shop, we launched a shop, and we've been selling these T-shirts all around the world. And I think we've just hit New Zealand and Pakistan,
yes,
in Australia, Dubai, Canada, UK, Europe, South Africa. I mean, it's been incredible. And so that has been like a really, really big thing for me. But one of the most important things, I think, for survivors is to not run before you can walk. And what I mean by that is, I didn't start out on my journey in life thinking, I want to be a campaigner. I purely went to therapy for the first time because I thought, I just cannot live like this anymore. I cannot live in this world where it's full of alcohol, and drugs and confusion and disorders and addictions, and maybe the Trevor, the CID guy, my friend Chris at the pub, they maybe saw all those things that I can now see in myself, but I couldn't see it back then, and I needed to step away. So I did move away. I have still got some of my friends from back there, but I actually moved away from all the people that I was drinking and having a lifestyle that I wasn't enjoying. And went into therapy just to live a better life. I went in that therapy session that day thinking 12 weeks, I'll be nailed. But 12 weeks didn't even scratch the surface, right? And everybody's journey is different. I've heard therapists say, oh, you only need 6 weeks, you only need 12. I'm like, well, I don't personally believe that. I think we need a lot of time, and we cannot put 6 weeks or 12 weeks or 24 weeks, or you like you said earlier, there's no one size fits all. This is a very bespoke journey. Some people might get over it. Well, I say get over it, they might heal within 6 weeks, but it lives with you for a lifetime. So it's about understanding what you can get. So I found the therapy really helpful. I found the conversation of understanding that I was a child, it wasn't my fault, very helpful. I did a lot of regression work through my therapy. And the other thing that I really helped me was to keep changing. I'm quite dynamic anyway with everything that I do in my own world. So for me, it was talking therapy, it was tapping, it was sound therapy, it was hypnotherapy, it was psychotherapy, it was acupuncture, it was reflexology. In the latter years, it became clairvoyancy, not because I wanted to speak to the other side, just because I found it very helpful to understand the spiritual side of who I was. And I got that through the clairvoyancy. Some people don't believe that. Some people don't believe Reiki. Some don't believe tapping. Some believe, doesn't matter. It's what it makes you feel better because of your trauma. And like I said, no one size fits all. It's a very bespoke journey. But I think it's also very important for me to say that I didn't achieve what I'd achieved to date without a lot of therapy and support.
No.
I absolutely do not advise anyone to speak up or share anything publicly about their personal story until they are in a stronger space, have a greater understanding of their own journey and what they are facing and how they are facing it. Because I've seen people crippled by going out and speaking too soon. I've been speaking in my business for 30 years as a speaker. I've been speaking about my own journey for maybe 6 years now, maybe even less than that. But it hasn't come just because I've just gone one night and want to go and speak on a stage or telly or in a newspaper or this. I've taken years, and I've had to get to a point where I feel comfortable to be able to challenge any conversation, good or bad, which comes, I'm afraid, if you sometimes you get to a point where you do start, everyone wants to get vocal with you. 10 years ago, I'd have gone under a shell. Now I'm like, no, hold on a cotton picking minute. We're going to talk about this, and we are going to try and understand together what it looks like for you and for me. And that took years and experience and maturity and knowledge of who I was. And it wasn't people telling me who I should be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying, and thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and insights and experience with us, EJ. It's so valuable, so valuable. And, you know, one thing you said that really resonated with me was, you know, you don't run before you can walk. And I think what I love about that, and Survivors watching as we're closing now, what I love about that is you can't try and achieve what isn't right for you, because you will either, as EJ said, crumble, or you will not have a good experience. So I think trusting self is really important. I love that EJ said that. Another thing she said, which has stuck with me, is that what makes you feel better throughout your journey, because it's such a bespoke journey. So I think those are really powerful, and big amount of respect and honour to EJ for sharing with us today. So as always, beautiful survivors, so honoured to bring this to you. I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.